Some new reporting now undercutting a key Trump claim about the classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago. The former president and his allies have insisted, falsely, that a government agency, the General Services Administration, packed those boxes that were ultimately sent to his Florida estate, Mar-a-Lago. But now, the agency has released hundreds of pages of files and pictures proving that simply was not the case. CNN's Kristen Holmes is here with more on that. Kristen, what have you learned and why is it significant?
Well, John, in between these pages and pages of minutia about office supplies and what's going where, there was actually quite a bit of news. And we start with, as you said, that claim from Trump and his allies that the former president couldn't possibly be held responsible for anything that was found classified document-wise by the FBI at Mar-a-Lago because he simply did not pack those boxes. Nobody in his orbit packed them. It was done by the GSA, the small agency that helps with transition, and they were the ones that did this, so nobody knew anything about it. These documents debunk that claim. While the GSA did move the boxes, that's part of their job, I want to pull up that picture again because this is how the GSA found the boxes when they arrived to move them. You can tell here they were not unpacked in any way. They are completely packed, they are labeled, and they are shrink wrapped, waiting for the GSA to pick them up. And this picture came from a Trump aide who was showing the GSA what it was that needed to be moved and transported down to Florida. Now, there were a couple of other interesting findings I want to note. One of them, this is about the timeline and the dates on those emails, because while we know now that these boxes were simply sitting on pallets in an empty office space in Virginia, shrink wrapped, including 30 bankers' boxes, which were the type of boxes that were retrieved by the FBI. This was happening at the exact same time the National Archives was starting to sound alarms, raise concern that they were missing some of the presidential records. What's interesting about this is that never comes up. Documents never come up in these exchanges back and forth. But what does come up is the National Archives. This is raised because an aide asks the GSA if it will be willing to transport a 300-pound, 6-foot by 8-foot portrait of Trump that he received as a gift down to Mar-a-Lago. The GSA says they will not do that that is a gift, and then talks about the rules of the National Archives, what goes there, and says that that's personal property, so it doesn't fall in the same category. But interestingly, none of those documents ever come up. And John, I do want to note, we cannot confirm that any of the documents that were in those boxes were what was recovered by the FBI or turned over to the archives. But all of this happening at the same time.
Kristen Holmes, thank you for that important reporting. Let's bring the former state federal prosecutor, Elie Honig, into our conversation. Our great reporter is with us as well. Elie, on this point, as Kristen just noted smartly, we don't know if the classified documents that were recovered by the FBI are in this here. But the idea that Trump and his allies have said, well, the GSA packed these boxes, the GSA did this, when you have the visual proof and the email exchange saying, no, actually, these were all packed up by Trump transition aides. It's a boring email, but it's very important when you're talking about who did what, right?
Yeah, John, it's crucial because it goes right to the heart of the issue of knowledge. This is something prosecutors are going to be looking at. If, in fact, it was the case that GSA packed up these documents, that GSA transported them without Donald Trump or people around him knowing what went down to Mar-a-Lago, that would be a significant point in defense of Donald Trump and the people around him. But, of course, it turns out that's not the case. As Kristen just reported, there's documents showing that these documents were packed by people around Donald Trump. And frankly, Donald Trump has acknowledged such in his public statements. He's acknowledged that he knew documents were removed from the White House and brought down to Mar-a-Lago. And all of that goes to the core issue of knowledge. I guarantee you prosecutors are paying attention to that.
Well, prosecutors might be paying attention to these GSA. They might also listen sometimes to the former president. He was out this weekend, and he says there's no crime here, and I want my documents back.
No crime. You know, there is no crime. It's not a crime. And they should give me immediately back everything that they've taken from me because it's mine. It's mine. They took it from me in the raid. They broke into my house.
Elie, they legally served a search warrant that was issued by a federal judge on his house. They didn't break into his house. They legally served a search warrant, and they recovered what the search warrant said they could recover. But to the point where the former president says, it's mine, it's mine. Is it his?
No. Well, some of it actually is, John, a very small percentage of it. We actually learned just on Friday. Now they're going through the special master process, and there are a certain narrow class of documents that DOJ and Donald Trump's team agree were personal property of Donald Trump, and they are being returned to Donald Trump. However, that is a small fraction of the total amount of documents that were seized from Mar-a-Lago, and that's not what's ultimately going to be at issue for prosecutors here. They're looking at the classified documents. They're looking at the sensitive documents, which both sides, in some cases, have agreed are not Donald Trump's property. So it's a little bit of a misdirection here. Some of the documents seized, a small percentage, were Donald Trump's, but those aren't the bulk of the materials, and those aren't the ones that prosecutors are focused on.
All right, misdirection is a very important word. Let's get some of the politics now. Ellie, stay with us as well. Let's get some of the politics. He talks about misdirection, about, chain of custody, whose documents are they? Confuse people, just confuse people out there. Listen to Donald Trump this weekend saying, I'm under investigation, he tells his supporters. What about the other presidents?
When will they investigate and prosecute Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, George Bush, and look into what took place with George Bush's father, a very nice man, and the warehouse of documents? And what about Barack Hussein Obama? Are they under potential prosecution?
This is classic Trump and misdirection in the sense that he wants to run for president again. He knows all these investigations, and we'll see where they get us substantively by then. That's a long ways off, 2024. But the idea being, well, they say I'm corrupt, but we're all corrupt, every president. Where are the investigations of everybody else? This is a time-tested Trump strategy.
Absolutely, and this is what he did right after news broke that some of the documents might have contained nuclear secrets. He said, well, Barack Obama, falsely of course, said Barack Obama took documents containing information about nuclear secrets. What about him? He took 30 million records, all this sort of made up stuff. So I think he's trying to distract or normalize what's happened to him and politicize the FBI, that they're only going after him, but they haven't gone after previous presidents for similar crimes, misdemeanors, whatever you want to call it, which is obviously not true. But like you said, it is misdirection, trying to confuse his supporters and distract from what it is that actually happened. Because when this first happened, everyone thought this would be good for Trump. And then, of course, the details came out and it's been very damaging.
Right. We know, going back to the earliest days of the Trump presidency, that he obsesses about crowds. I want you to listen to this obsession about a crowd and connect the dots.
Biggest crowd I've ever seen? January 6th. And you never hear that. It was the biggest, and they were there largely to protest a corrupt and rigged and stolen election.
He's proud of the big crowd on January 6th. Part of that crowd attacked the United States government, injured, brutally beat police officers, threatened the vice president of the United States. He's proud of that crowd.
Yeah, and of course he would say he's referencing the crowd that preceded the riot, but I think it goes to show that his priorities are on something that's not really rooted in policy, governing, not rooted in the truth often. It's rooted in, just kind of satisfying behavior kind of. It's just not necessarily what we thought we would see from a former president, but this is classic Donald Trump.
Well, and the story forever with Trump is not him, it's everybody around him. Like, we know Donald Trump cares more about crowd size than anything else, but what's more telling is that it's October of 22, he's giving that speech after being impeached twice, leaving office in disgrace, and the statewide candidates in these states are still showing up with him because there's more of a penalty politically in their minds for not showing up than standing with him. And that, to me, is the bigger reveal about the state of his party and what he's done to his party. We know who Donald Trump is. What the tell is here is how he has reshaped one of our two parties in this country.